folks, so it's a quick one today, and it's a tip for Lumix cameras. Now, one of the issues, and I'll illustrate it here with a Star Wars toy. One of the issues that you get with Lumix cameras is when you set them for long exposure and you have the exposure simulation turned on so you can see what the exposure is, the frame rate drops. So if the exposure is 1 second, the frame rate will be 1 frame a second. Now this can be a problem, and I've been looking at a way to get around it, but really there isn't. You can turn the exposure simulation off, but it's sometimes hard to know that it's off, and then you can't get the exposure right. So this is quite a handy way to do it. So before you set it up, you need to turn the touchscreen settings on your camera, because these are going to operate like a indicator to show you whether it's on or off. So let's bring the menu up. So you go in there, make sure your touch settings are on, and you're going to configure your touch settings, which you can do in the camera menus. So when you bring the menu up and you turn the touch settings on, you also need to configure the custom menus as well, which you can do through the custom function on the camera. And you need to have the exposure simulation option, the constant preview as it's called, assigned to the touch functions. And also you need to assign the live view boost. This is the important one. Although live view boost doesn't make a vast bit of difference, it can kind of help with the shadows when you turn it on and off. So once you've set up the buttons on the camera and you've got your constant preview on the top and you've got your live view boost button, if the live view boost is grayed out, that's because constant preview is enabled. If the live view boost is highlighted and you can change it, it means the constant preview is actually disabled, because this function, the live view boost, is there to adjust the brightness of the screen under long exposure conditions and improve the shadows. It's not hugely effective, but it does make a tiny difference. And let's have a look at the live view boost here. So I brought it up again. I'm bringing a little toy on in front of my subject, which is the bike boots, and just moving it backwards and forwards for the live view boost, and we switch it on, and then we switch it to mode 1, and then we switch it to mode 2, and then we go back to off. You'll see that it doesn't really make a difference, but where we do get a difference with the live view is that we get the full frame rate. So if the camera is at 1 second exposure, it'll still run at 25 frames a second, so you can compose more easily. Now note at the bottom of the screen we've got the exposure meter, which I think in this example was about +1 1/4, and also note the histogram. Now the exposure meter is correct, and when you're in this mode where constant preview is off, you have to rely on the exposure meter, because the histogram is inaccurate. What you see on the screen is not accurate. Now when you turn constant preview on, as I'm going to illustrate now, you will see that the frame rate is terrible. And this is because the camera is trying to simulate the exposure and the look of the exposure. So for example, if you were doing a waterfall, it would actually simulate the water in a 1 second exposure. And to do that, it has to slow the frame rate down. But that's no good if you're composing. So you can flip between the two, as you can see, by using the touch interface, and you can quickly see which one is turned on and off. And also when we've got the correct exposure shown with constant preview on, we can trust the histogram is going to work as well as the exposure meter. So note, the exposure meter in the middle at the bottom is always going to tell you the correct exposure, depending on the type of metering that you've got set. So I've got average on, but you could have spot on or anything like that. But when you switch the constant preview off and the frame rate comes back up to a more manageable level to reframe, you have to rely on just the center exposure meter. So you can see that by programming these buttons on the touch functions, it gives you a very quick visualization that you can bring up more easily, and it's more easily usable than the Q menu, because the Q menu doesn't really show you what you can and can't do. It does sort of grey the button out, but this just gives you you can leave it on the screen and see what you're doing with this menu. You can see recompose your shots and you go, oh, I just need to pop that on. And I tend not to use the boost. You can play around with the live view boost to see if it helps you. I don't think it's fantastic, but it's a very quick way of getting around this problem and actually taking advantage of this way that it's a very unique way that Lumix cameras do the constant preview. Because if you're doing a waterfall, it's actually really good to actually see what the waterfall's actually going to look like. Now you can go in and change the behavior of how constant preview works, but I would have it showing the shutter and aperture effect, which is the default setting. The other settings are just really confusing, and I wouldn't bother with them. Just make sure it's simulating everything, so what you see is what you get with the constant preview. And if you want to recompose when you're at a lower frame rate, then all you need to do is set the camera up like this, open your touch interface for your touch functions, tap it off. You know it's off. You know constant preview is off when your live view boost is enabled. You can see it lit up, and then you can make your composition changes with the frame rate not jittering. Switch it off from the same interface, and of course you'll see that the live view boost is unavailable, so you know your constant preview is on. And this is handy for where you're not using a super slow shutter speed, but you drop into one and you're not quite sure where, if you've got it. You see, when you change it through the a button I found, or you assign it to a custom button, it seems to toggle through the various settings which I was talked about, where it's do shutter effect, do aperture effect only, do both shutter and aperture effect, and that's where it can get really confusing. When you've actually just assigned it to the custom function touch button, it seems to behave in a different way. It just turns on and off, and that's what you want. You just want it to turn on and off and not cycle through the different modes it has, because you can never tell what mode it's in. But by having that extra button there, it's just a handy way that I found of more reliably letting me compose and then flip it on and off, knowing that I've got it on the correct setting and I'm not going to mess up the exposure. So give it a try. It's definitely a quirky area of Lumix cameras. Give me some feedback how you get on with it, or if you had any trouble setting it up, because I've tried to explain it as best I can, but it's a very unusual setting and a very unique setting for this camera. So anyway, if you enjoyed the video and you got value out of it, please do like and subscribe, because I do lots of different camera videos like this, and occasionally I do a travel vlog on my bike with cameras, so tune in for those as well and click the bell for notifications. Anyway, sorry it's a quick one today, folks, but and it might be late. I'm hoping to get it up for Wednesday, could be Thursday, even if it is Natalie's on Wednesday on Natalie's sofa, sometimes it's not. But I've got a lot on with house moves at the minute, so I've got limited time, so it's very quick fire. This camera's just sitting on the table and I've just sat planted in the middle. So I'll catch you all later, folks. Bye.